A room in Lagos now costs more than some people's yearly salary. And often, even if you can afford it, there isn't anything available.
Meanwhile, for a city that is growing faster than its homes, the idea of renting, not to talk of owning a home, is simply out of reach.
So where are people supposed to live?
For many boys here, homelessness begins with a single turning point: a broken promise, a family conflict, or the loss of the person they depended on.
Lagos has a housing and affordable housing problem.
Using traditional materials is not just about the heritage, it's about the technique that they hold and reinvent them with our modern methodologies.
This week, we focus on the housing crisis in Nigeria and beyond, asking whether fast-growing megacities can modernize in inclusive ways while protecting the informal communities that support livelihoods and urban life. My name is Fatou Muloshi.
And I am Rachel Nduati.
Welcome to the show. Now, inadequate infrastructure, unregulated growth amid a deficit of over 3 million housing units, Lagos is going through a housing crisis. But who is building it? Who are they building for? And is policy ensuring that the average person can also afford a roof over his or her head?
While this show focuses on Nigeria, the situation is similar in many megacities across Africa. We highlight the core issue of a lack of housing and explore the consequential problems, and one of them is homelessness. The lack of affordable housing often affects the most vulnerable, and Lagos is becoming a home to thousands of people who live on the streets.
One of those boys is Eze. He came here believing he was starting something legitimate, but the reality waiting for him was different.
I think about my life every day living under the Coca Bridge. Sometimes it makes me cry. When I was living with my father, life was good. But now, my situation is very bad. I am suffering. I'm suffering a lot.
In southern Nigeria, in the city of Asaba, dozens of children and teenagers live beneath bridges and along busy roads. Many arrive alone, hoping to find work or escape difficult situations at home. Instead, they become part of a growing population of homeless youth. One of the largest gathering points is Coca Bridge. For many boys here, homelessness begins with a single turning point: a broken promise, a family conflict, or the loss of the person they depended on. Oreva Godwin is the founder of I Am a Teens Foundation, an organization committed to youth development and child advocacy in Delta State. She says cases like this are becoming increasingly common.
There's an increase of boys on the street is because boys are risk takers, and they have this mindset that leaving the rural area to the urban area will give them a better life. And most of these children are being deceived.
Eze's childhood ended on the street too quickly. He was exposed to violence and exploitation.
When my father was alive, nobody dared to beat me. But on the street, I get beaten. You can see scars all over my body.
Eze's story is not isolated. Under this bridge, there are many boys like him.
Yeah, it's a very sad story, Fatou. And I mean, this is not just a Lagos problem. This is some of the biggest cities also have this problem, like Nairobi. They have the cities. We saw street children, struggling to find a place where they can live. And they have this idea that living in a big city, there's that idea that, when you're living in a rural area, you're always told, when you go to the big city, you're going to make it in life. So they have this preconceived notion that when they get there, they're actually going to make it. And then when they finally get there, the reality hits that this is actually not the place that they actually had in mind, they had thought about.
True, no, there's the issue of rural-urban migration and what we're seeing in Lagos here, this massive urbanization that is currently taking place. But also you have the situation that we've just seen, orphans in the streets, people who are just abandoned, minors who are left there unaccompanied, people who are also going through economic hardships, conflicts in their households. So there's a lot of compounding factors there. And then you have a situation where you are dealing with a country that does not have like a proper, housing system,
plan,
right? Where they can even shelter people who are going through homelessness. And the temporary shelters are not even sufficient. And so we have a situation where people are left in the streets because somehow they need a roof over their head. So you see them in these bridges and we know that the consequences there are even dire, because what happens when they cannot go to a proper housing or in fact find a way to survive? Because remember, if you leave these rural areas, you come to a place where you know no one in.
You don't even sometimes speak the language, because sometimes, for example, if you go to Kenya, in Nairobi, people speak Swahili in Nairobi, but that is not the reality. If you're coming from central Kenya, you speak Kikuyu. If you're coming from, the western part of Kenya, you speak Luo. So can you imagine somebody who was just like living in a rural place and then coming back to the city? The reality that hits is a bit of a toughy one. But
so the consequences are there, and we know what that could do to the socio-economic fabric of the country. And so what happens when there is no proper housing system? Something there gives us the gist, because we do know that locals can also exploit the loopholes at the detriment of the masses.
Have you ever tried to rent a home, maybe in Nairobi, Kampala, or Lagos?
Yes, here in Lagos.
What was your experience?
I've paid agents, not once, not twice, not 3 times. And there's a normal thing agents do. When you pay them, even if they don't have the house, they'll tell you that they have the house, show you pictures and all, tell you locations. When you get to the place, you see that the house does not meet the average standard of houses that's supposed to be in that location.
You call an agent, they ask for an inspection fee. You get there, no house. Very disappointing.
We paid an agent over 700k. They said we can move in. We swept, we did everything, only for us to move in. Say the landlord said he does not want us here, that we should move out.
So, what is really going on?
Agent they big, tenants don't live finish. Even landlord self no see money for your food.
For many young people, this isn't a one-time experience. Different agents, different cities, same frustration.
Start paying an house rent now. The commission and agreement that we pay now is outrageous.
As we speak, more young people now rely on friends, online platforms, or just luck. If I get them, I get them.
We don't need agents in this country at all.
Finding a home is not just stressful, it's unpredictable, and maybe it's time to fix a system that seems to work the same way no matter where you are in Africa.
I had a conversation with Favor yesterday. I wanted to call her and ask her, so how much would it cost for a house in Lagos, in the mainland? And she told me that in the mainland is actually very, very expensive. You could also pay, like for just one bedroom, you could pay millions of naira. Millions of naira. And sometimes when you convert that, it's like 1,000 USD.
Look at
and
that.
For me, I'm just like, where?
The
New York City
prices.
Talking
About how living standard now is getting more expensive in Africa compared to even parts of the West, because you would think in the past that, it's easier and cheaper in Africa, but now it's getting more and more expensive. We'd be surprised that what you spend here would be almost equivalent to what you would spend when you go to the Gambia nowadays. So this is we have a problem there, and this is not something you solve within a day or just instinctively. There needs to be a proper system, because as we speak, people are going through homelessness, and they're being driven out of their homes. There are demolitions that are currently happening in Lagos, and the consequences there is clearly massive.
And it's the case of Makoko, where government is demolishing buildings and driving away residents in the name of megacity modernization. But what does this mean for the fishing community, that has survived over a century on stilts in floating neighborhoods?
Recently, there were demolitions here. Tell me what happened.
In case of that demolition, and you look at it, that the government was trying to create another imagination behind themselves, meaning that they have in mind of selling out this large community. This is a waterfront community. They were having in mind of selling out this community to rich men so that they are handing them some money. Now look at me, that you cannot ever take fish from the water and put it on the ground. What will happen to that fish? The next thing that it will die. So that is why we in Makoko community, we live on water, and here's our business. Our business move close to the water, because our forefathers, they all the way trace their background all the way from Badagry in 19th century, looking for water side, where to start with the fishing business, because the nature of our people here, the nature of the business is fishing.
By January, the government had already demolished over 500 meters. So what that means is that the whole idea of, public safety was simply an excuse. The community, however, never disagreed with the need for public safety. In fact, when the government came in December last year and said that they needed to remove structures under the power line, the community agreed with them and went on to even measure the area under the power line that needs to be demolished. What has happened in Makoko is a government using deceptive means to try and push the people away from a community that they have called their own for more than 100 years.
During that demolition and after the demolition, that you see that people are sleep inside the canoe and all those things, because they don't have anywhere to go.
Do you think Lagos has a housing problem or an affordable housing problem?
Lagos has a housing and affordable housing problem. I think there are three ways we look at the housing issue, housing deficit in Lagos. We look at it in terms of availability, we look at it in terms of accessibility, we look at it in terms of affordability. So when we talk about availability, currently, there's about 3.4 housing deficit in Lagos. And now we're looking at it in terms of both the quantity and the quality of housing. So it means in terms of the units readily available to the people, we are deficient in that. And also in terms of the quality, people are largely living in substandard housing. A larger proportion of Lagos residents live in 70% live in informal communities or slum. So that's on the one hand, one issue. In terms of affordability, let's say a larger proportion of people rent, right? And the rent has increased astronomically, let's say 10 times more than the income of the people. So people cannot readily even afford, rental housing, not to now talk of owning the housing, then also accessibility.
Wow, the situation in Makoko is dire. But the thing is, what I really don't understand, right, is when governments really see that, informal settlements have very many people. And I did a bit of research and I saw that 250,000 people live in Makoko.
Yeah, about 250. Almost 300,000 people.
And for me, I know that during electioneering periods, politicians will always come to ask these people for votes.
But because these people need the development, so they know that such communities are vulnerable and they are in desperate need of government support. So I do think sometimes the issue is also politicized, where politicians leave these areas so that when it's time for elections, they can easily go and, manipulate people too.
Yeah, true. But somebody mentioned in that debate that the government had said that it's because of, the electric wires, something to do with electricity. And then I'm just like, why would they do this? They should at least collaborate with the people, understand where the people are coming from, and then work with the people.
I think the question we need to ask is, who is the government developing for? And I think that gets a little bit clearer as we go into the next part of this street debate.
The government itself doesn't have an idea or have a proper plan for those who are at the bottom of the pyramid of housing in the city of Lagos. The planning is usually done for the 1% of the 1%, which is at the top. So when there's also now population expansion and tension, you'll find a situation whereby the government, struggling with land space, begin to look for waterfront communities and target them for housing development because they are considered prime location for luxury housing development. So if you look at Makoko here that we are in, you can just look across, then you see Victoria Island, where the affluent actually live. So it's an encroachment coming from there, now beginning to think of housing development, luxury housing development in this space.
We can't really plan with informal community if you don't even see them as part of the community that exists in Lagos. Because I'm very sure when there's a political interest, this place will be seen as part of Lagos.
Why is that? Why aren't people building homes that people here can live in?
It's true that what we have predominantly here are luxurious apartments. And I think that it's a need for developers to face reality that there are actually real demand beyond luxurious housing. There's a demand for housing.
The impression there is as if, the people of Makoko feel that they've been abandoned by the formal state infrastructure. And that is clearly a cause for concern because we're talking about a community that is in the heart of Lagos, the heart of the city.
And it's a lagoon. When you hear a lagoon in a city, you think this is a bit of, a place where people can live in and people can reside in because it's touristy. But I think also there comes a time when, the government maybe weighs its options. And so there's the justification side versus the reality side. So they're justifying that, the it's a high flooding risk area. They're justifying that, the electricity thing could come into
Safety,
play.
yeah.
And then sometimes, I even read sometimes they just do silent evictions where people are just attacked in the night.
What I see is it's not like they do not want to work with the government. Like someone said it, they do want to work with the government. It's just about planning with them. If it's about safety and sanitation, they do want safety for themselves as well.
Everyone wants safety and sanitation.
Yeah,
but
you
the
just
government
need a
should
proper system,
collaborate.
to make that work for them. And like I said, if you drive them away, where do they go to? Because like Favor tells us here, the city is already congested. There's already a lot of congestion in Lagos. So what exactly is going to happen?
Lagos is that type of city where getting from one place to another can feel like a full-time job. On average, Lagosians spend about 30 hours a week stuck in traffic, which is far higher than many other major cities around the world. I experience this firsthand on a daily basis. I live on the mainland, but I work on the island. And typically that journey should take me about an hour to an hour 30 minutes, but I end up spending over 3 to 4 hours on the road. Imagine spending that much time on the road just because of traffic. And it's not just me. This is the daily struggle of anybody who lives in Lagos, having to spend so many hours on the road just trying to commute within the city.
Hey, Fatou, Favor actually was in Nairobi at a time when we were doing Science Unlocked. And do you know she wanted to move to Nairobi? Because she was like, oh my God, this place, people follow the lane.
Yeah.
We're not staying 4 hours in traffic. And I was just like, how is this chaotic? How is it so chaotic in Lagos?
Yeah, but you see, that is what happens with massive urbanization like this that has not, proper planning or policing. But of course, we do know what happens when there is congestion.
Yeah, speaking of congestion,
Yeah.
hey, sometimes it's also about sanitation. And when people are way too many people and there's no solid planning, for example, in Lagos, there can be a lot of crowding and there can be problems with, the drainage issues, the drainage channels, and even flooding. And have a look here.
But there's another issue you can't miss when you are out on the lagoon or near the coast: waste. Trash is everywhere. Lagos produces about 13,000 tons of waste every single day, and most of it ends up in landfills or worse, our waterways. The problem is that not enough of this waste is being properly managed. A huge portion of it is plastic, and once it finds its way into the ocean or the lagoon, it becomes a long-term environmental hazard. To make matters worse, only about 40% of the waste in Lagos is actually collected. The rest, it's often left to pile up in neighborhoods, clog drains, and pollute our water. And it's not just solid waste. Lagos also has a major issue with wastewater. Less than 10% of the homes are connected to the city's sewage system, which means a lot of the wastewater, both from homes and businesses, ends up untreated, flowing directly into the streets, drains, and eventually the lagoon. There's been a lot of controversy around this over the years, especially after reports that untreated sewage from commercial and residential areas was being dumped straight into the lagoon. This has caused health and environmental concerns across the city.
Yeah, it's really a problem. I mean, the more dense the city becomes, the less space you have for, drainage or waste disposal as well. And in the city of Lagos, we have a situation where people are building homes on, the waterway, or also building makeshift homes as well. So as this urbanization is gaining momentum, we need to ask really, where would people go to? Because if, for example, people in Makoko also have to leave and find themselves in other parts of the city, we need to really be concerned, because clearly people have to leave somewhere regardless. So let's go back to that same community of Makoko, which is at the heart of this issue, for a possible solution going forward.
What do you think should happen?
Well, I think we have to hit the nail on the head, which is that we face the current crisis in Makoko and across Lagos State because the government, since the early 90s, has adopted a philosophy that government should not have business in public education, in housing and all of that. So the driving seat of development has been handed over to the private sector. Decades after, we see the result, we see the disaster. 3.4 million shortage housing in Lagos State. Meanwhile, almost all of the materials for building exist in this country. We need to say that the government must drop this neoliberal capitalist idea of development. We need a people-centered developmental approach that sees housing, for instance, as a right that must be guaranteed for everyone, regardless of their social status or their economic power. And that means, for instance, first and foremost, governments will return back to that policy of building low-cost housing, low-cost, affordable, but yet standard and modern. And also, saving these kind of communities is also an essential part of that. There are 300,000 people here. If you demolish and evict them, you add to the crisis of housing. But if government upgrades this place and go back to the original vision of the Water City initiative, then we'll be solving the housing crisis in Lagos one step at a time.
Thank you, Hassan. Wada, I did start with you and I'd like to end with you, seeing as you're hosting us here. What does the community need in order to keep thriving and also live in dignity?
Our community here is a very great community because I was born and brought up and I'm still living in Makoko community. I love that. I love Makoko community. Now, what we need in our community, we just want government to come to the round table to discuss with us. This livelihood, this is how we are living. This nature of our job, our business, our occupations. Look around. Like what our brother is, if you take us from this place, you tarnish the image of people who are also in education and all that. How will they survive in improving the education of that child? It's very, very difficult for that. So, power of government, you need to be educated. These are the rights. It's our rights. We need to be educated. We are right to shelter. We are right to really food, to be fed. Okay. So if those things are still our rights, government, why are you denying us our rights?
Interesting. I mean, it was a very powerful conversation. You can watch the full debate on our YouTube. It's out there for you to see.
Yeah, and as that guy said, governments need to collaborate with people because I feel like most governments, and it's not just the Nigerian government, it's most African governments, they tend to, they have this idea that they want to build more and they demolish more. So they don't necessarily want to upgrade the systems of living. And they also focus on luxury estates where the fancy neighborhoods, posh, bougie neighborhoods are for the selected few, the 1%, as that person said in that debate.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to make sure that, basic economic needs are prioritized first. And I think you said it, we have a tendency of driving away problems instead of confronting them. But that's about Makoko and Lagos. It's important that as we're talking about building, how can we move forward? How can we work together, build synergies? As we're talking about Lagos, it's important that even their inner cities are connected. And I think that is something that becomes clear in this video as well.
We need to have intercity communication and interstate agreement. Lagos can't work in isolation at bettering itself. It needs to work in partnership with other states. It needs to set examples also as to how it's dealing with its housing crisis, its housing problem, and aim to replicate these solutions in other cities. What you'll see is that when these states start to come together and realize that the population problem is not just one state, but it's a national problem, you'll see that funding will be directed to the right place.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one there, but I mean, we can also we can take a few learnings from that lady right there.
Yeah, like she said, the most important thing there is to work and build synergies between states and make sure that, what we're working with is indeed working for the people.
Yeah, but African governments, for example, in Kenya, African governments like to refer to Singapore. Singapore has this housing development plan that they subsidize housing, they have rent control, they make sure that the tenants are not charged way too much money.
Yeah.
And I think we tried to use this language as well when we were asking voters to vote for us. But
it's a strategy.
It's just a strategy.
I think we need to open our eyes because for years we're still yet to see that Singapore. But let's see how practical other countries are becoming. Is it really about Singapore or is it about building local, using what we have to cater to our reality?
Meet Fatia. She quit designing skyscrapers abroad to fix architecture at home.
Using traditional materials is not just about the heritage. It's about the technique that they hold and reinvent them with our modern methodologies.
She uses traditional materials plus modern techniques. Buildings made for Senegal, not Paris. Low heat, low cost, big identity. This is future African design.
I prefer to think in terms of responsibility rather than sustainability. I think as long as you design in a way that is responsible and thoughtful of the resources and also people's traditions and way of life.
Yeah, we can learn from this. A lot of traditional, knowledge that we have. And sometimes we tend to underestimate and we want the Western side skyscrapers. Sometimes Nairobi is called like the New York of Africa. But how about having a Nairobi of Africa? Like, how about having an Abidjan of Africa? So sometimes we have to also know that what we have is powerful.
If we're forcing people to leave their own communities to go elsewhere, how much of that contributes to the already existing congestion that is in a city like Lagos that is already grappling with sanitation issues? So let's look at policy, but let's look at the local reality, and that is to build, start local and build for the people.
Also, where are you guys living? Talk to us. Tell us where are you living? Which city are you living in? Tell us what are the frustrations? What is your landlord saying? What are your scenarios when you're looking for an apartment?
We do want to know.
We absolutely want to know. Connect with us at the 77% on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. You know where to find us.
Yeah. We would see you again some other time.
Until next time, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.